Did you know that the gloom weapons that Ganondorf uses all have an inscription on them which reads Kotake Koume? These inscriptions are written in Wind Waker Hylian, a clear reference back to Ganondorf's twin blades in the Wind Waker, which also featured the same inscription. But more importantly, Kotake and Koume were the 400-year-old surrogate mothers of Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time, and they also appeared in the Oracle games. Although we are never explicitly introduced to them in Tears of the Kingdom, they are there. In the memory, a show of fealty, they can be seen behind Ganondorf, identified by the fabrics on their shoulders which show their names. Not only is the fabric identical to the headbands worn by the witches in Ocarina of Time, they also have a really small gemstone embedded within their golden masks. One red, a ruby representing Koume's power of fire, and one blue, a sapphire representing Kotake's power of ice. The witches are also present in the Gerudo assault memory, once again stood behind Ganondorf. It's unclear whether Kotake and Koume were Ganondorf's surrogate mothers in Tears of the Kingdom, but there is clearly some emotional connection between them, since not only do they share the same green skin as Ganondorf as opposed to the other Gerudo warriors, who all have brown skin. Ganondorf also has a ruby and sapphire embedded within his necklace. What is clear is that they played a significant role in the Gerudo tribe, likely as close associates to Ganondorf, or perhaps as captains of the guard, much like Buddha-Yara's and Riju's relationship. However, when Ganondorf finally ascends to his Demon King form, they aren't present and we never see them again. In fact, Ganondorf no longer appears to have any connection to the Gerudo at all. Whether he abandoned them in favour of an army of monsters, or the Gerudo abandoned him, having witnessed the extent of his lust for power, is unfortunately something we are never told. Speaking of the Gerudo, Calyban is an NPC found within the Gerudo shelter. You may remember her from Breath of the Wild, where she could be found eating hydromelons on top of the walls of Gerudo Town. In Tears of the Kingdom, she is now looking for the foe of her dreams, and since Gerudo law forbids any males from entering Gerudo Town except for Link, she decides to float a bottle downstream containing a message proclaiming that whoever finds the letter is the foe she was fated to meet. What Calyban does not know is that the stream doesn't exceed the boundaries of Gerudo Town and instead leads to a dead end, and so her hopes of finding her dream foe are essentially impossible. Returning one of these bottles to her leads her to think that Link is in fact her dream foe, and in return, she prepares meals for Link each time he visits her, and interactions like these are what makes Tears of the Kingdom so special. They aren't meaningless side quests, rather they are real interactions with NPCs that make the world so much more immersive, often offering small insights into the game's lore, and driving forward exploration to see what other small secrets NPCs can reveal through their dialogue. Now for this next secret, I want to talk about the 5 sages and the Zonai. After Link completes each regional phenomena, the sages will speak to him about an ancient treasure spoken of in an old document that they've discovered. These old documents contain a riddle, and the treasure that it leads Link to are the Divine Beast helms. But what's interesting is that when Link wears the Divine Beast helm, the sage's appearance will change, and they will now put on their corresponding ancestor's helm. When the Divine Beast helms are worn by Hylian, it is said to deepen the bond with the corresponding sage, and we see this as the sage's damage output increases by 50% when Link wears these helms. We can also see Minna's appearance change when Link wears the Zonai helm, although this is a small change which only seems to add a headpiece and some Zonai ornamentation around her eyes. Now the Zonai were a highly advanced race that descended from the heavens, and though the Triforce is generally absent in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, it is represented through Zonai architecture. The Zonai runes left on Hyrule's surface are symbolic. Dragons represent the Triforce of Courage, as evidenced by the Spring of Courage being at the end of Dracozu Lake. Owls are used to represent the Triforce of Wisdom, while boars represent the Triforce of Power. Minna's mask depicts an owl, and the Spirit Temple is also filled with Zonai statues of owls. Zonai runes all across Hyrule are adorned with the depictions of these sacred animals, especially the Typhlo runes, where their presence is far more prominent. It's worth noting that the ancient sages wore the Divine Beast helms long before the Divine Beasts were even created, so it's clear that the Sheikah tribe took inspiration from these sacred animals when creating the Divine Beasts. Whatever the Divine Beasts were, they must have been extremely influential in the time of Hyrule's founding, and deeply important to the 4 tribes of Hyrule. We see endless depictions of them within the Zonai temples. In the Fire Temple, depictions of the divine animal that inspired Vah Rudania are present on the locked holding the gate leading to the secret stone, as well as stylized Zonai depictions all across the temple. The Water Temple features grand depictions of an elephant all throughout, with huge red elephant heads at the entrance. The same can be seen in the Lightning Temple, filled with murals of camels and the heads of a creature resembling Varnaboris. The significance of the 4 divine beasts even goes beyond their importance to the 4 major tribes of Hyrule. The Zonai bow is adorned with the heads of the divine beasts, suggesting that they were important to the Zonai to such an extent that they decorated their most powerful weapons with their likeness. Perhaps these beasts served as symbols of power, symbols of protection, or even divine beings to the Zonai. For now, these 4 creatures will likely remain a mystery unless DLC or another game in the future comes along and sheds further light on them. Their absence in the current era of Hyrule likely implies that they are extinct, but given that remnants of their influence can be seen in ancient Zonai architecture and ruins, there's no denying that these creatures did exist and were revered by Zonai civilization. Within the throne room in Hyrule Castle, right above the throne, lies one of the few remaining intact remnants of the sanctum as it was before the calamity struck. Now, what's special about this Triforce are the adornments that surround it. At first, you may think nothing of it, but the small circles around the Triforce are in fact a callback to Ocarina of Time and represent the notes that compose Zelda's Lullaby. As you can see, the notes match up identically to the notes Link plays in Ocarina of Time, and although this was present in Breath of the Wild, it was quite difficult to see as entering the Sanctum would trigger the battle against Calamity Ganon. There are countless Easter eggs in Tears of the Kingdom which are more obvious references to previous games, from a Korok puzzle that resembles the crest of the Kokiri, to Link humming classic Zelda tunes while he cooks. But the more obscure and hidden Easter eggs like this are the ones that really evoke that feeling of nostalgia. Speaking of Easter eggs, Jerin is a Hylian researcher and the wife of Robbie. She can be found in the Lookout Landing shelter after Link completes the Hebra regional phenomena, and she'll tell Link of strange growling that can be heard beyond the wall. This will of course lead Link to the location of the Forbidden Horn statue, the entity that deals in life and power. What's interesting is that when asked about the Horn statue, Jerin will proceed to shed light on the lore behind the Horn god. She says that as there is the goddess of light, then it follows that she would have an opposite, the Horned god. Like light and dark, one cannot exist without the other. Their power manifests through the other's existence. This seems to match up almost exactly to Princess Zelda's dialogue in the post-credits scene of Twilight Princess, when Midna returns to the Twilight Realm. Here, Princess Zelda also says that shadow and light cannot exist without the other, and I can't help but see this as an intentional nod back to Twilight Princess and the idea of light and darkness being intertwined, if nothing more. In Breath of the Wild, all we knew about the Horn God was that the goddess Hylia disapproved of his heinous dealings, and so imprisoned him within the Horn statue. However, in Tears of the Kingdom, Jerin hints at the entity residing within the Horn statue having once been a deity, enshrined in the very spot where the dais now stands in the Lookout Landing shelter, a dais being a platform primarily used for ceremonial purposes. Or at least, that's what she thinks, and we unfortunately never get to learn any more information about this mysterious entity. Ultimately, we're left with far more questions than answers. Who really was the Horned God? How and where does he fit into Hyrule's mythology and history? Why can the goddess of light not exist without the Horned God? We will likely never know the answers to these questions, but in a way, I almost prefer that. It leaves room for further speculation and the development of different theories, allowing the community to piece together what they can to try and solve these mysteries. Deep within Hyrule's depths, we find the Bargainer statues, mysterious entities who claim to merely return all Poes to the afterlife without prejudice. Poes are not a new concept in Zelda at all, and they are spirits that usually haven't been able to pass on into the afterlife due to a lingering attachment to the mortal world. The Bargainer statues tell us that Poes are spirits that ought to return to the afterlife, and that they are peaceful beings who have lost their way home and now wander this land. Now, the Bargainer statues are shrouded in mystery, but what deepens this mystery even more is the ominous face that is carved onto their backs. At first, it seems to resemble Dark Beast Ganon, or a Bokoblin's face. This face is something we have never seen before, and if it truly is a depiction of Ganon, what could that mean about Bargainer statues? They don't seem to be inherently evil or connected to Ganondorf in any way, since the Bargainer statue themselves tell Link that good and evil are the futile perspective of narrow-minded beings, and that they make no such distinction between wonder and spirits. In one of the Yiga notebooks found within the many Yiga hideouts in the depths, a Yiga soldier speaks about their encounter with one of the Bargainer statues. They claim to have heard a strange voice echo around the Bargainer statue night after night, and whenever a Yiga member would approach the statue, they would lose their soul. This is quite strange, especially since there is a bargain statue in Lookout Landing with plenty of unsuspecting souls to take, yet nothing has ever happened. Another thing that's strange about the bargain statues is that each and every one of them correspond to a goddess statue on the surface. Specifically, the major goddess statues found at the Sacred Springs, the Forgotten Temple, and at the Temple of Time ruins. The bargain statue directly beneath the Temple of Time actually uses the goddess statues to communicate with Link, which is quite bizarre in itself. This bargain statue asks Link to return his eyes to the statue beneath the great abandoned central mine, and upon doing so, we learn that in ancient times, its eyes were stolen and sealed away, and that it has waited for eons for someone to hear its voice and return them, which is an incredible amount of time and raises countless more questions. Finally, Link is rewarded with either a heart container or a stamina vessel, so the bargain statues are able to replicate the same power as the goddess statues too. What these statues are is honestly anyone's guess. Whether it is one entity speaking through these many statues it calls its brethren, or multiple entities that are intertwined in some way, is something we currently don't know. The tunic of the depths they bestow upon Link only deepens the mystery. The tunic shares the exact same design as the seal on Dark Clumps, and these Dark Clumps are only dropped by the Gloomspawn and Phantom Ganon, as well as sold by the bargain statues. In-game, they are described as an unusual substance, cold to the touch and seemingly filled with pitch-black darkness, so perhaps the strange markings act as a seal, sealing away the gloom, which would also explain why the tunic offers Link protections against the gloom, and would imply that the bargain statues aren't actually evil. Again, we are left with more questions than answers. What do the strange marking on its head mean? Does the face sculpted into its back really depict Ganon, or is it something else entirely? Who was responsible for stealing its eyes and sealing them away, and what purpose did that serve? I honestly do feel that we'll get more information on the lore surrounding these statues in upcoming DLC. They really seem to be a setup for something much bigger down the line, just like the Zonai ruins were in Breath of the Wild. For this next secret, we're staying in the depths and exploring the shadowy apparitions who hold pristine weapons. Their existence alone raises many questions, but have you ever wondered why you come across 3 at once? We already know that many points of interest on the surface correspond to something of significance in the depths. The bargain statues are all beneath goddess statues on the surface. Shrines are connected to light roots. Towns on the surface have a grand mine beneath them. The 3 colossal fossils all correspond to a dark skeleton in the depths, and there are many more correlations. But when investigating, I found that the locations of these gatherings of spirit soldiers all correspond to the monuments dedicated to the souls lost at the Calamity. These monuments themselves were set up by Princess Zelda in places where significant battles took place during the Great Calamity. One such monument is located right before the Akala Bridge ruins, where during the Calamity all the soldiers who had survived the slaughter at Hyrule Castle fell back to the Akala Citadel in an attempt to survive the assault of the ancient Guardians. Unfortunately, the Guardians were far too powerful for Hyrule's remaining forces, and as Akala Citadel fell, so did the Kingdom of Hyrule. Now, these soldiers are very likely the spirits of those who died during the Calamity, unable to move on to the afterlife as they cling on to a purpose, which just so happens to be passing on pristine weapons to Link. We know they are spirits because of the blue light that envelops them, identical to the Poes and other spirits we have seen, such as the spirits of the champions and King Rome. Intriguingly, when speaking to Yiga soldiers in the depths, they mention that all they can see upon these formations are floating weapons, so it seems as though the soldier spirits only show themselves to Link and not anyone else. Once Link takes the weapon that they hold, they disappear, seemingly as though their purpose has been fulfilled. At the end of Breath of the Wild, we see the champions and the King of Hyrule fade away once Calamity Ganon has been defeated. Their purpose fulfilled, they could finally move on to the afterlife. And so the same applies to these spirit soldiers. Having been felled in the Calamity, it seems as though their souls held onto the mortal world to hand over what I presume would have been the weapons that they personally used in battle, now given to Link to aid him in his journey to defeating the Demon King. From the beginning of the series, the Gorons have been a race that have played a significant role in the history of Hyrule. However, the age-old question surrounding the Gorons has always been how on earth do they reproduce? This mystery has sparked many wild theories over the years, ranging from theories suggesting that Goron offspring grew from the backs of existing Gorons as they aged, to some suggesting that they were carved from stone and somehow turned into a Goron. We know that they refer to each other as brothers, and though that is just a cultural thing, we've seen countless Gorons with actual family ties. In Ocarina of Time, the Sage of Fire Darunia had a child named Link during the 7-year absence of the Hero of Time, and Yunobo is the direct ancestor of the Goron champion Daruk. Tears of the Kingdom finally provides us with an answer to this age-old question through an easily missable side quest. Once Link has completed the Fire Temple and Goron City has returned back to normal, 2 Elder Gorons can be found standing in front of the inn, discussing the place that they were born. They will casually tell Link that Gorons are born of the land, and since they were born from the same place, they are considered brothers. And so this is how we finally find out where the Gorons come from, and that they in fact do not reproduce, but are rather born of the land. It's not clear whether the land they are born from is specifically Death Mountain, or just the land in general, though since we can find Gorons in Termina, I'm assuming that Gorons are just born of the land. It's also interesting to note that Gorons born from the same piece of land at around the same time are considered brothers, so perhaps for Goron Link to have been Darunia's son, he must have been born from the same piece of land, but just many years after Darunia had been born. This would explain why we never see any female Gorons, but I do find it funny that a significant piece of Goron lore has just been hidden in a meaningless side quest that many of us would have easily overlooked. Now, one thing I love most about Tears of the Kingdom's world is how much more immersive it feels than it did in Breath of the Wild. The NPCs are far more interactive. You'll wander the world and talk to members of the Zonai survey team, and then meet them a while later on their own journey halfway across the map doing their own thing. It's clear that the developers added these details to keep this familiar Hyrule interesting and full of life. And we see this with countless unique interactions in the game. If Link takes off his clothes, he'll draw certain reactions from many different characters. Paya will shy away from Link and not be able to look him in the eye. While Toro envies Link and wishes that he too could run around topless. The Koroks also reacts and will make fun of Link for walking around in his underwear. But if Link tries this in Gerudo Town, he's instantly stopped by the guards and thrown in prison. We can also trigger special interactions if Link uses specific Zonai devices on certain NPCs. Spraying a Zora with a fountain will result in them feeling refreshed. And watering Magda's flower bed will actually evoke a positive reaction from her. Unless it's raining. We see these reactions from the Gorons too, when using a flamethrower or fountain on them. And there's likely so many more of these interactions that I've yet to come across. Speaking of unique interactions, did you know that you can instigate a small war between constructs and monster encampments? Construct camps are usually found in close proximity to monster camps, typically separated by a small barrier of wood. Burning these down from afar will actually lead to the constructs attacking the monsters. It makes sense that the constructs behave this way. The Zonai created the soldier constructs using advanced techniques and magic for the sole purpose of destroying any being it deems an enemy. Throughout the depths, we find these huge monsters known as Frox, but we can also find their offspring, the little Frox, usually in close proximity to the larger Frox. To me, these Frox seem to share a distant connection with the Dodongo from Ocarina of Time, though this connection between the Frox and the Dodongo isn't officially stated anywhere, and so it's just all speculation. Now, while exploring the depths, you will likely be thrown bright bloom seeds to illuminate your way to the next light route. Although the little Frox are more of a nuisance than a threat, if they are near to where you have thrown a bright bloom seed, they will actually eat it. This would explain why they drop bright bloom seeds when killed, as it's essentially a part of their diet. They also drop Zonai, though when thrown towards their direction, they'll inspect it but do nothing more, so it seems that the Frox don't actually eat Zonai. Zonai is also dropped by every monster that dwells the depths, and for some reason is also mined by bokoblins. Since little Frox drop items that they eat, I initially thought it could be possible that these monsters eat the Zonai as a form of energy, since in the depths they don't sleep and seem to work non-stop. We've seen that Zonai can be utilized to produce energy when processed, so perhaps these monsters who were enveloped in Ganondorf's gloom are only mining this Zonai to fuel the Demon King back to his full strength. Now, this final secret does contain major spoilers for the final battle in Tears of the Kingdom, so if you haven't finished the game, I'd suggest you return to this once you have. After Ganondorf transforms into his Demon King form and immobilizes the 5 stages, it becomes a one-on-one final battle against Link. During this second phase, Ganondorf constantly unleashes waves of gloom towards Link, which at first you'd likely decide to run away from before continuing with the fight. But did you know, Link can actually hit these waves of gloom right back, and additional blue beams of light will emerge from the Master Sword and also strike Ganondorf. This is very reminiscent of the final battle against Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time. As well as the battle against Phantom Ganon in the Wind Waker. Link is only able to do this with the Master Sword, however, for if Link uses any other weapon to try and parry Ganondorf's projectiles, it will break instantly. Ganondorf is so powerful that even arrows are ultimately ineffective against him. In his first phase, Link will only be able to headshot him once, as the next arrow will be deflected effortlessly, and Ganondorf will immediately charge at Link. Once Ganondorf has transformed into his Demon King form, it's almost impossible for Link's arrows to hit. Ganondorf will deflect every single arrow Link fires unless he's charging up an attack, which is something I didn't even come to find out until the third time I fought Ganondorf, since I'd stuck to only using the Master Sword for previous fights. I guess it wouldn't be a true final battle against Ganondorf without some sort of energy tennis match after all, and I'm glad the developers included such a callback to previous iconic fights in the series. If you've made it this far into the video and you enjoy this type of content, please do consider subscribing. I plan to talk about much more of the lore in Tears of the Kingdom, and I'd be happy if you would be here to join me. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and do let me know of any other secrets that you know of. A big thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.